As 2022, the year that was very eventful, but more so for the Uganda diaspora. And I'm going to really kickstart with you people to paint a clear picture of what the year looked like for the Uganda diaspora. And Milton, I'll begin with you. What were the key highlights for your year 2023, rather 2022, as a Ugandan in diaspora?
Thank you so much, and Happy New Year to both of you. I mean, the same issues that afflict people back in Uganda specifically, and also the African continent generally, also causes us much distress, of course. And the inability to focus on building a modern and developed economy that can really fulfill the needs and demand of our population. So rather than focusing all our talents and all our capabilities and skills in building the economy, increasing the level of national income, we find that we are spending so much energy trying to remove a dictatorship in our country. That consumes so much time, so it's no surprise that we are not making much progress when it comes to economic issues. So if you look at countries that are actually succeeding on the African continent in moving forward, you look at their national income increasing. If you look at the World Bank statistics, I mean, I have major disagreements with the World Bank on very many issues, but at least they keep the same set of data for all the African countries, and we can use that for comparison. So Ghana, for example, in 2021, the per capita income is $2,363. Botswana, $6,805. Kenya, $2,081. And then you come to Uganda, $883. Just imagine. So we're talking that Ghana is almost 3 times more the national income per capita in Uganda. Even Zimbabwe, which has had a debilitating sanction for like 20 years or so now, the national income is 1,773. So think about that. Even with the sanctions, Western sanctions, their national income is double that of Uganda. So that to me is the best measure of how much this dictatorship is causing for us. And we cannot sit back and say, let's focus only on the economy, because we cannot do anything about the economy so long as the dictatorship is blocking progress with the corruption. You know, even when you partner with the institutions I said I disagree with, like the World Bank and IMF, they steal the money. When you have other sources of foreign assistance, the money is being stolen, embezzled. So that to me, as an overview, is the main problem that we are facing. Everything else emanates from that problem of having a dictatorship in the country for 36 years now. And then we can go into the specifics, like the continuing campaign of kidnapping people, torturing people, killing people, the famine in Karamoja, the ethnic cleansing campaign in Karamoja, and many people suspect people are being killed so they can be displaced from the land because the land contains gold, and that's the only thing that they care about. And then we have the Ebola resurgence in the country. So these are the things that distress all of us in diaspora, because when our people are afflicted back home, obviously it causes us a lot of distress as well.
Milton, for that. Alfred, we're glad you're joining us. Happy New Year. We're seeing you for the first time here on the Uganda Diaspora Show. My name is Lynn Komugisha, and with us is Miriam Kyomugasho, Milton Allimadi, and yourself, of course. Coming to you, Alfred, what do you think were the key events that rocked the Uganda diaspora the year 2022? Alfred, we can't hear you. Okay.
Maybe he's on mute.
Yeah, he's right. Miriam, you can take over, please. What events do you think have rocked the Uganda diaspora in the year 2022?
We had the Ebola scare. I mean, after COVID, that one was, we didn't know like how far it can go and then how many people will be affected. And knowing Ugandan health facilities, of course, you are always, you're worried like how much can be contained and how far worse can it be. But thank God it didn't go, it didn't get much worse, but it disrupted some travels and all that. So, and even the prices, the inflation, the hiking of prices and scarcity of goods, which both affected USA and then all other countries. And then back home because of, I mean, whatever affects people back home affects us directly. The increased prices. If you are taking care of people, you know you have to send more. Yet we are also facing the same inflation here. So people had to work extra more and all that. And still, again, it's still ongoing. So you don't know like how far it's gonna affect you, and some plans were disrupted, and that goes back to the Ugandan government. Like, how can something so small? I mean, it's not small, but something like so far away, like the Ukraine and Russian war, how can it affect food prices in Uganda? Given that Uganda is an economy which is agri-based, and we are supposed to be producing enough food locally, but just the price of wheat and fuel is enough to cause food inflation in Uganda. That shows how vulnerable our economy is, and it's something we need to work on. We should be able to sustain ourselves if we fail at least in industrial products. But when it comes to food, we should be able to sustain ourselves as far as food and feeding the country is concerned. Actually, we should be having capacity to even export to other countries. And this war and food scarcity across the world should have been an opportunity for Africa to step in and export the food to the rest of the world, since most African countries are agro-based and they really depend like 80% on agriculture for economic sustenance. But we instead, we were not able to cope, and we also suffered food scarcity like other countries, which largely depend on imports for food sustenance. So that's something that I hope our leaders should focus on. How can we be sustainable locally without having to rely on imports? Since we depend on exporting fuel for the next few years, I think those bottlenecks should be resolved locally, or find a mechanism to resolve that locally without having to cause inflation, as inflation upsets everything in the economy, including people's incomes and their survival. But another thing that happened in diaspora was this recent US Africa summit. It happened so towards the end of 2022, but it had much impact. So to affect or show us like really what's going on as far as the world political economy is concerned, and how it can affect Uganda. What was more upsetting was that the voices of the people, when USA came to doing business, it ignored the voices of the people, the human rights concerns, all the issues that it had claimed to be standing in solidarity with African peoples that they have been advocating for. So, and that gave us, I think, some work to do as human rights advocates, as as people who care more about Africa, to see how do we move forward. If we are going to have these international relations with other countries, how should they relate with us as Africans, with our leaders, the way they are, the governance issues, the human rights violations and corruption and all that.
Right. Thank you very much, Miriam, for that. Alfred, I don't know if you're able to speak now. Alfred Okot-Ochen is from Canada and is an expert in management and conflict analysis, especially on African issues. So, Alfred, we're glad to have you today. Please, if you could speak, we are trying to pick each other's minds on what events, honestly, rocked 2027 in 20. Oh my God, I'm going very far. 2022, yes, 2022 as regards Uganda diaspora. Alfred, I can see you're unmuted and the problem is you're not speaking. Alfred, please speak to us.
Tell him to check his volume. Sometimes that's happened to me when my volume is off on the computer.
Anyway, sorry about that. I think we'll get to. But what we're going to do now, Milton, is that I want to come to you because there were three issues that stood out in regard to Uganda diaspora, and that is the Uganda human rights situation. But also we saw that Uganda's main opposition party grew somewhat stronger in the West, and but it had issues as well. And so I want to look at how it stands come 2023 and how it will move forward. But also you can look at the Africa-US Business Summit that happened and what we will learn from that. Quickly, let's start with the Uganda human rights situation. Human Rights Watch said that there was a marked deterioration in Uganda's human rights environment. And whereas they're saying this could have been an overflow or a trickle down from the 2021 general elections, it continued throughout the year because we kept seeing cases of kidnap, cases of abduction, and continued torture, alleged torture of victims. So it has been ongoing, and we do not know if it is going to stop. The National Unity Platform was was petitioning the Western world to come to its rescue, to come to Uganda's rescue in regard to human rights. But it seems either they're wasting their time or the allegations are not true. Allimadi.
Okay, well, in terms of the allegations, we all know it's true because the government does not even hide it. After the people are kidnapped in broad daylight, people videotape people being kidnapped. People videotape people being beaten on the streets. So, in terms of these are not allegations, unfortunately. It's so funny because if you look back, it's not funny, but it's ironic that at some point, even during Idi Amin's era, sometimes they would kidnap people. Occasionally they did it in broad daylight, but mostly it was done in secret at night. Not so visible. But now, this government has so much contempt that it's done in broad daylight. So I don't think we need to even debate whether these are allegations or not. These are just niceties that sometimes the West talk about, allegations, unproven, blah, 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 when in the case of Uganda, it's so blatantly obvious. So regarding the kidnapping, the torture, the killing, this will not end so long as this regime in place is still in power, because that is the only way it can maintain itself in power. It has no legitimacy, it has no base. So its base is the military. And the only thing the military knows how to do, unfortunately in Uganda, is not to defend the country, but to brutalize the people. So we will see that continue. In terms of what can be done, sometimes these things do not reveal themselves overnight, but I am very confident that at some point we are going to see some indictments coming from the International Criminal Court. I would not be shocked if Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the son of the dictator General Museveni, has already been indicted, and that the indictment might be sealed. And why do I say this? Because in response to a petition that I was a part of a group that filed at the ICC when we had the protest more than a year ago during the Diaspora Summit of NOOP in the Netherlands, and we protested outside the ICC, and we delivered a petition. Never had I received a response to any petition that I had submitted to the ICC. But in this case, I did. The petition outlining the crimes by General Muhoozi. I received not once, but twice communication from the ICC, acknowledging receiving and acknowledging that this is not a confirmation that he will be investigated or indicted. But I think the crimes that he's committed, as well as his father, have become so serious that I think they're looking at it in a different way than in the past. So that's why I say I will not be shocked if at some point the indictments are unsealed against either General Muhoozi or both General Muhoozi and his father. Now, in terms of the US-Africa Summit, I take a broader look at it because I also have background, of course, in addition to journalism, in economics. And
Milton, sorry to cut you short. We're going to come to that topic. I wanted us to handle one after the other.
Oh, I thought you'd ask about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Alfred, I don't know if you've now cleared your audio. Could you unmute and speak to us? Okay, I think we seem to have a problem there. Miriam, let's proceed. We're looking at the Uganda human rights situation, which was, continued to make headlines across the year 2022. And even now, we're still seeing that there's, opposition people, human rights activists are still calling upon government to look into the issues of human rights violations in the country. And just before we concluded there on December 6, 2022, the Uganda Human Rights Commission vowed to fight and eradicate incidences of torture and abductions that have been reported across the country for close to 4 years now. Now, this, they say, was the start of the long journey to solving the conundrum of disappearances of people. 5 lists have so far been presented to Parliament and have been also presented to the security operatives across the country to make sure that these people are allocated. Do you think this really found? Do you think this is going to improve now that the Uganda Human Rights Commission has, put in some effort to try and say we are going to bring everybody and account for everybody that has been missing?
They've had more than a year to do that, and they have the resources. What were they waiting for? Were they waiting for the Parliament to call them out to do it? I feel it's like there are people who know their role but are reluctant to do anything about it, either because of the government imposing on them or whatever the reason is. But I really I'm so reserved about having so much hope in them. They can try. They are trying. Sometimes they try to do something, but when it comes to really big issues, like we saw how when Kakwenza was tortured allegedly by the first family relatives, we saw them do nothing, and it took several court issuing several orders for him to. Actually, it took intervention of international bodies to just call upon the release of putting pressure on government to release him, and the Human Rights Commission was there. It's there when thousands were abducted. It's there when they are not presented in court and people are calling out for their lost relatives and all that. It's been there watching all these things happening. I mean, even the newspapers highlight the number of people being tortured. MPs, day in, day out, call upon the government to stop even that method of having to kidnap suspects instead of arresting them the normal way, going to police and issuing arrest warrants, and informing relatives that, your person is suspected of ABCD, and this is where you can access them. Instead, we've continued to see kidnaps. Even today, even as we speak, I am sure there are people who are being kidnapped somewhere, because every other day we see people missing, people being kidnapped by state operatives and taken to unknown places, tortured for so many times, and some have spent years, and we haven't seen them produced in courts or even someone accounting for them. And then we also have a case of 2 MPs who have spent a year in incarceration, and the parliament can't do nothing about it. They are not presented in court. If you can't even defend your own members of parliament, how are you going to defend ordinary citizens? So I don't know why I'm so pessimistic, but it looks like it's the same business as usual. And we really, I feel like we need, as human rights defenders, as human rights activists, we need advocates, we need to do much more in bringing the government to accountability, the security agents, to make them, every other organization has its role. If it comes to arresting people, it shouldn't be the army. Then actually the court has recently pronounced itself on the court-martial, so it said that civilians shouldn't be tried in the court-martial. So we don't see why so many opposition leaders continue to be taken by the military security agents into unknown places and then presented in court-martials as if they are military criminals. They are not part of military, and they shouldn't be subjected to persecution by military forces, whose role is clearly stated in the Constitution. Their role is to protect the national borders, and torturing opposition leaders on behalf of NRM is none of their mandate. And we don't even see anybody talking about that. Why can't, if the Human Rights Commission is concerned, or the MPs, why can't they stop the interference of security operatives into the political bodies, into the political conflicts of or challenges of NRM party? It's like now we have UPDF acting as NRM army instead of a national army, and then we have the police looking on, and those human rights commissions and other watchdog institutions of the government. So I don't see that changing in the coming year, unfortunately, and I think it's something we have to think about on how to counter it and bring some change towards that.
Right. Thank you, Miriam. Alfred, can you speak to us? I think Alfred is having a challenge. We might need to just proceed. Milton, coming.
I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. What I'm saying is that, Milton, as we come to the start of a new year, and Uganda Human Rights Commission promising it is going to do its very best, or more so work on its mandate and bring to book the perpetrators, but also help us find the missing people and, kind of put a stop to the human rights violations in the country. Moving forward, 2023, honestly, will we have better reports? Are we going to see a change in the way our human rights situation looks like, especially outside there? Because here in Uganda, we might easily get away with it, but abroad, it really looks bad.
No, nothing will change so long as there's no cost to the regime of continuing to kidnap, torture, and kill people. And the Human Rights Commission will not be able to do anything because it is not more powerful than the military. The military is what we have in Uganda. There's a military regime. So the military is not going to listen to whatever parliament says. As Miriam pointed out, if you cannot rescue 2 members of parliament who've been illegally detained for more than 2 years now, and one of them, tortured by denied proper medical treatment for a foot injury that he had and some other injuries, then what hope is there for ordinary people? So the Human Rights Commission, of course, says what it is expected to say, that we are going to hold them accountable and all that. The only entities that can hold this regime accountable, of course, in addition to people, and you know, these things sometimes they don't plan it. It could spark a popular uprising. That is one way of holding a regime like that accountable. It happened in the Sudan when Bashir, who had been in power for like almost 30 years as well, ultimately people had enough and people came out to the streets. They were killed, but they kept coming back until they removed that regime. They still have crisis in the Sudan, of course, and they're still struggling to remove the vestiges of Bashirism, which still remains. Something like that could happen in Uganda as well. That's one avenue. The other avenue is, so long as the regime gets finance from the Western countries, why should it stop what it's doing? The regime gets about $1 billion every year from the United States, American taxpayers' money. And that has not stopped, even with the human rights escalation. So why should the regime stop? In the last 2 years, the regime, through the World Bank and the IMF, has received about $2 billion. So which means in the last 4 years, we are talking about $4 billion to sustain the regime. Now, if that amount of funding was suspended or interrupted, that is the only way that it will catch the attention of the regime. But so long as that money keeps flowing, it also means another thing. It means that the Western countries do not care about Black lives. They do not care about African lives. And that is the case because even in a country like the United States, if people have to come out to the streets and talk about, you know, Black lives matter, and that is the only way they can get some response and impact, what do you think their attitude is toward Black lives in Africa? So we need to adopt that approach and let them know that Black lives do matter in Africa. And that is why I'm a very big fan of protests against the World Bank and the IMF. I've attended many protests in Washington, D.C., and I know it's been effective. And why do I say this? Because the World Bank has been reaching out to Ugandan diaspora and urging them to stop the protest. And of course, that's a very good sign. And I tell my colleagues, that means we need to escalate the protest. And what we're trying to do now is to get our American sisters and brothers to join us at these protests so that we have more massive numbers whenever we show up. And they should expect that we will be showing up again and again at both the World Bank and the IMF this year going forward. That is the only way we can catch the attention of this very brutal regime in Uganda.
Miriam, I'm asking, moving forward, with the move of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, with all the activities that have been going on abroad, we have been seeing protests against human rights violations. Will this, in the year 2023, make any difference? Because we have seen that in 2022, you know, despite the protests, things have gone on as normal, as usual. Will there be any changes?
Yes, I think there will be changes, and like Milton said, if we manage to stop the funding or something which really Kampala regime cares about, something can be done. It's not like they're gonna be all of a sudden they're gonna be these human rights abuses will stop, but at least there will be changes. And I'm sure that even though the U.S. government hasn't pronounced itself yet on its way forward as far as dealing with African countries, especially if it wants to invest in, is concerned, I think there will be some sort of conditions, and as far as how the regimes conduct themselves back home if they want to be part of the investment. But by and large, I think if the Ugandan community continue to put pressure on the regime, especially if we involve the grassroots people, we need like creating more awareness, more pressure on the ground beyond what we are doing now. I know we are doing so, and people on ground are really doing so much that some are even exhausted, like feeling so hopeless that because you don't see the effects coming out. But I'm sure that in the long term, the effects are there. The Human Rights Commission now is coming out to pronounce itself on human rights accountability. It hasn't been doing that, and I'm sure they are feeling the pressure. But I feel if something has to be done, we also have to increase on the pressure, especially involving all stakeholders. The problem we are facing today is that there is a way Ugandans feel like human rights is an issue of either opposition or civil society organizations, not even civil society groups, because civil society goes beyond the NGOs. It should involve the religious leaders, and the cultural leaders, the academia. It should involve business players. It should involve ordinary citizens. So civil society, the problem we see civil society as NGO-based kind of agencies that are responsible for advocating for so either it's like a negligence of duty or there is a lack of civic awareness on who should be advocating for human rights accountability in Uganda, and that's a gap we need to step in and fill. Either we sensitize the population, or those who know should talk to others. And I'm always so disappointed by the lukewarm role the academia in Uganda plays in as far as politics is concerned. Usually the academia, even when the Ugandan government in the 70s wanted to change, we are pushing for change from Idi Amin regime. The academia, Makerere University by that time was at the leadership of that revolution, on that call for change. The academia, the professors were the lead agents for change. And they were either writing or either talking, and some were even imprisoned for that. But even when you see the writings of that time, the plays, the drama that came from that era, you see that there was a lot of activity going on as far as advocating for the freedoms of Uganda, human rights and governance are concerned. But today we don't see that much effort coming from the academia. I don't know what went wrong. I don't know what we are not doing right. But the academia, and so far Uganda is blessed with so many higher institutions. We have more than 50 universities going on. We have high schools. We have tertiary institutions, and these students, these young Ugandans, have an advantage of having internet, of having social media, and so many spaces where they can advocate for change, but they are not utilizing them the way they should be utilizing them. So if we are to see like a fundamental change, like what happened in Sudan when the population rose and ousted the dictatorship of Bashir, I think we need to see more active participation from these silent civil society players, the religious leaders, the cultural institutions, the community-based organizations, the academia, the young people, the other groups of societies, even if it's circles, even if it's traders, even if it's I mean, an ordinary citizen, one person can even lead a revolution or change in the governance. So if we I'm really positive there will be change, but I also think we really need to do something more, something different in order to see really good results coming out as far as human rights are concerned.
And Miriam, when you say something different, I wonder what different that is going to be and from where. Where are we going to start from?
It will start with me and you, Lynn. It will start from us. For instance, if you reach a young person, why don't you tell her, instead of sharing the trendiest shoes, instead to advocate for human rights? What do they think about the politics of Uganda today? What can we? I mean, sometimes when I'm so much of a Christian and I attend churches, but I usually tell my pastors, what are you thinking about the governance? How come that when people are running from the ABCD, you don't even mention it at the pulpit? It doesn't hurt. Just talk about it. Say wrong when it's wrong. I mean, when it's right, you don't even have to be partisan politically to advocate for human rights. You just have to say, this is wrong. Humans shouldn't be treated like this. And that's it. That's the voice we need. And when it comes to governance, I think academia still has to do something. I don't know how they're going to be woken up to do that, but I think academia plays a big role into the progress of the country. They should be lead agents. They should be leading in as far as research is concerned, as far as advocacy is concerned, as far as everything. Actually, they are like the think tank of the economy or the think tank of a nation. And once you see the academia dead and sleep, then you know that nation is really in trouble, which is happening in Uganda, unfortunately.
Right. Thank you very much, Miriam. Milton, now we get back to the issue of, we have been seeing that National Unity Platform throughout the year 2022 continued its protests abroad against the government of Uganda, characterized by gross violations of human rights, a lack of respect for the rule of law, and criminalization of dissenting opinions. Where, first of all, two things come to mind when we look at this. National Unity Platform has been at the fore of the call for the Western community to pay attention to the human rights violations in the country. But it has also experienced some shocks here and there in regard to its political infighting in there, but also the protests against each other of different factions of the party. Recently, we saw that during the President Museveni's visit to Washington, D.C., National Unity Platform held demonstrations, but we thought it would be a huge number. Just a couple of people showed up. And, so we are looking at two things. The future of the most interesting political opposition or political party in the country, and also looking at its future in the West and its causes. Will they be heard? Will there be any changes at all?
Yes, and first of all, I would like to dispel any myth in terms of the small number. In fact, the protest was as large and probably larger than the typical new protest here in the United States. So that's a propaganda campaign that was probably initiated by the regime itself. And in any case, any friction or divisions within the NUP or any other Ugandan opposition group pales in comparison to what is at stake, which is the removal of the dictatorship in Uganda, because ultimately that will benefit every organization, every individual, every community in Uganda, not just the NUP. The struggle is not an NUP struggle. It is not an FDC struggle. It is not a UPC struggle. It's not a DP struggle. It is a struggle of every Ugandan to remove the dictatorship that is holding back development. As I started off this conversation by showing how the regime has failed to deliver. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what people care about is, can I feed my family? Can I feed myself? And a few weeks ago, in fact, one of the tweets that I sent out was that this was the most useless dictatorship in the history of dictatorships. And I compared it to Singapore, where we had Lee Kuan Yew, who was, in essence, a dictator. He was there for a long time, 20 plus years, but he turned his country into an underdeveloped country into a modern country with one of the highest per capita incomes in the world. I even gave the example of Gaddafi in Libya. There's no question that Gaddafi was also a dictator or dictatorial, but Gaddafi also turned his country into a very backward economy into a modern country. Because whatever people say about him, he cared about his people and his country. And he put the oil money back into the Libyan economy. Not only did he put it in the Libyan economy, but he was also helping other African countries, including regimes such as the one we have in Uganda, you know? So this is a very perverse kind of dictatorship that we have, a dictatorship that does not care about its own people. If the person was holding on to power because he's saying, I've been delivering, and look at the example where the country was, and look where the country is today, which of course Lee Kuan Yew could say in Singapore, which of course Gaddafi could say in Libya. In fact, Gaddafi was instrumental in changing how the oil was managed. He said, why are we allowing them to dictate the price, meaning the West, of the oil that we have? We have the resources. If we don't allow them to dig it from the ground and export it, they won't have it. So let's set up an organization. He was one of the principal people instrumental in organizing OPEC. And of course, now OPEC, at that time, oil was selling for like maybe $20 a barrel or what have you. It moved up to $100, $150, and now it fluctuates. But it was because he cared about his people. And the money was able to build infrastructure in his country. Education was free. Imagine, all the way to university in Libya. Housing is subsidized. If you get married, you used to get a grant to start your new family. Your phone bill was paid. If it's the landline, you only pay for your cell phone. Healthcare was free, you see? So I'm giving all these examples to contrast with what we have in Uganda. A person who wants to hold power just in order to protect himself and his family. I'll give you another very interesting point. An American senator told me, he said, we know that Museveni wants to continue as president because that is the only way he can protect himself and his family and their ill-gotten wealth. So even the people that sustain him know the reason why he's in power. So that's the challenge we face. The protest, as I said, has to be very strategic and very visible. If you protest in front of the World Bank, in front of the IMF, it will have impact. If you protest in front of the State Department, it will have impact. If you protest in front of the United Nations here in New York, it has impact. The US mission to the UN, it has impact. These are the kind of protests that I encourage Ugandans to continue doing, because we know back home it's very challenging. These kind of protests would be met with live bullets. So sometimes I don't blame the people back home, because if the regime is willing to send soldiers to the National University, Makerere, and rape women, students, beat students, as happened a few years ago, I can understand why students would be intimidated, why academicians would be intimidated. So if a protest is to be effective back in Uganda, it has to be a national broad protest. Like in South Africa, the South African regime was very brutal as well during apartheid. Kidnapping, people would die, and then they would say, oh, they hung themselves. Even after they killed Biko, they said Biko killed himself. They said, what about all these blows to his skull, crushing his skull? They said he was bashing his head against the wall in the prison. Yeah, but what happened in South Africa? They formed what they called the United Democratic Front, which is what Miriam was actually alluding to. That's what we need in Uganda. The United Democratic Front included the clergy, student unions, trade unions, sports clubs, academic organizations, even vendors on the street. Like in Uganda, we have the border vendors. All of these came together, a total of 400 organizations. At that point, the apartheid regime could not sustain it. So it was not only the ANC that brought down the apartheid regime in South Africa, but it was when South Africans decided to all come together and form the United Democratic Front. That is what we need in Uganda as well.
Thank you, Milton. Now, Miriam, while we still look at National Unity Platform as the leading opposition party, its power struggles between the NRM and, of course, the National and it have played out in diaspora. Uganda Diaspora was, we could see that we're between two factions, I beg your pardon, that is NRM and, of course, the National Unity Platform. Can Bobi Wine's anti-Museveni campaigns in the West play off? Can they pay off as well? And will they have, can they have everlasting solution on really in regard to our politics?
I wouldn't call them Bobi Wine campaigns, and they are not specifically like anti-Museveni, but they are for change, political change in Uganda. Museveni might even leave power today, and tomorrow we get another dictator who is even much worse.
That's right.
So we are fighting for good governance. We are fighting for respect of human rights and freedoms. We are fighting for economic development in Uganda. And the increase, actually, Bobi Wine is not the cause of the increased protests in diaspora. He is one of the leading leaders, is the leading figure, but the protests were there and they were growing in numbers. As things continue to get worse in Uganda, then if you don't know, even even after the amount of money, like Milton mentioned, more than $2 billion per each year or 2 years, are being bumped into the economy. The economic condition in Uganda has continued to deteriorate. From 2017, the poverty numbers have increased. The number of poor is so high that today you see the leading headline saying that less than 1 million Ugandans earn 1 million shillings per month. 1 million shillings, by the way, is less than $300. That's not even enough to take one child into a secondary school. And that's less than, if we have 40 million Ugandans and you say 1 million Ugandans can earn that much, that's less than what percentage? I think less than 10% of the population. And that's how bad the situation is. If you have a population, 80% of the population cannot even take their child to a secondary school. If you have such a population, how many Ugandans are malnourished? They talked about famine in Karamoja, but we know every other year there is going to be drought in Karamoja, but nothing is being done to stop people from dying of starvation. That takes very little, because all you need is get food from an area which has a bumper harvest, either Mount Elgon or whatever in the east, and take the food to another region, which is a few kilometers away, where people are dying of starvation. But our country can't do something so small like that. Imagine in 21st century, we still see people who die of starvation. I mean, to die of starvation means you can't even have drinking water, because some people can live on water for a long time. So that means you can't even eat the leaves. That means you can't even, have even something to eat which can sustain you, whether you are malnourished, but you reach an extent of dying. So if you can die of starvation, suppose you get a disease, are you going to survive from that? Even a smaller disease like malaria, which is preventable, which can be cured so easily, or even a cold, like a cough, like whatever. So we are still at that level where Ugandans are still dying of starvation. We are still at that level where children go around naked because they can't even afford second-hand underwear. We are at that level where districts which are purportedly developed, like Ushenyi, has the highest number of stunted children. I come from Bushenyi, we have the highest number of stunted children in Uganda. And nobody can solve that. And that issue has been there for more than 20 years. The regime has never looked into primary health care, even putting nutritions on ground, which can go around and talking to people how to feed well their children so that they are malnourished. So kids are being fed from one type of food and then they lack the others. And then we have incidences where you find people who think they are dependent on agriculture, like cows. People still have milk going for 500 shillings a liter. I mean, I don't know how much 500. I think 500 can buy a bunch of kawaragara. I don't know how much 500 shillings can buy, but that's how much. So a farmer who is dependent on milk is going to starve because you cannot afford to buy any other thing since the money coming from milk is not enough. So people of diaspora are protesting, not because of Bobi Wine or any other leader that has come up. The leaders are leading figure. They come up and help people to run around an issue, and then they did that protest or that movement. But they are not the cause. And people in diaspora, I think face the biggest challenge when it comes to finances, because when Uganda is down, when your dependents are poor, then you have to spend a lot on them, and you also have to work hard to sustain them. And most of the Ugandans in diaspora, by the way, are economic refugees. So we are talking of people who leave their country, like those those girls who go in the Middle East, because you can't find jobs, because you are educated, but your country can't take care of you after spending so much on funding your education. You find yourself in a situation where you are working on the street for more than 5 years and you can't find a job. Your family is expecting you to take care of them, or if you have children, nobody is taking care of them. You don't have money. So you push yourself into some sort of economic slavery, because we know the conditions they are working in the Middle East. So those are the people that today are saying enough is enough. Let's do what we can and protest. I'm sure even if it wasn't Bobi Wine, even if there was no leader, still Ugandans would be protesting for change against the regime in Kampala. So and that situation is getting worse and worse. That's why we see so many people coming up to protest. And it's not going to end until we see something happening. And I hope it happens so fast, because some things need to be changed, especially the way we see young people unemployed and they are pushed into some sort of slavery where so many end up dead or tortured, and that shouldn't be happening to Ugandans. That has to stop.
Right, indeed, it has to stop. Many things have to stop in the country, because and over the years we have seen continued outcries over these issues, and it's not just the Uganda diaspora, but even here in Uganda, even as much as we do not go to the streets, there are complaints all over the place. I mean, people are quite unhappy. But how 2023 is going to play out, we wait to see. Now, if I could come back to you, Milton, in regards still to the issues of first of all, human rights, because they're huge. These are the issues that the main opposition party, fronts: human rights, the economic situation, the political situation. I mean, in say a few minutes, if you are to project, come 2023, we are here. If we are to project the future of this country in regard to those three key issues, where do you see the biggest attention going?
You mean in terms of
in terms of human rights, in terms of our political situation and the economic situation?
Right, something will definitely have to give, and I think something is giving, but it's superficial. So, for example, when the dictator brings in a person like Norbert Mao into the government, that's not because he woke up one day and he said, oh, you know what, I've always had a soft spot for this Norbert Mao, so let me make him a minister, It is not happening like that. It's happening because he's reading the writing on the wall. So he's saying, what can I do before this thing boils over like a volcano, before it erupts? So he's that's why he's having all these superficial measures. So obviously that's not sufficient. The change cannot be dictated by him. He's trying to create sort of a soft landing, for himself and his family. But it reminds me of what Ian Smith was doing when what was then apartheid Rhodesia was coming to an end. And he was also reading the signs on the wall. So he saw the inevitability of what was called the Patriotic Front coming to power. The Patriotic Front was an alliance between the late Robert Mugabe's party and the late Joshua Nkomo's party. So that goes back again to the importance of forming these broad alliances. These were two separate major parties fighting to end apartheid in Rhodesia. They had a political as well as a military wing, but they also saw the benefits of all coming together to form their own version of what later on in South Africa became the United Democratic Movement. So we need that in Uganda. But what did Ian Smith do? So he picked somebody called Bishop Abel Muzorewa, who was also sometimes a critic of the government, but not all the time. He was more accommodationist, and he was often working together with Ian Smith. So Ian Smith appointed him a prime minister of what he called Zimbabwe Rhodesia. So he was not willing to go all the way to Zimbabwe. And this was a superficial change that Ian Smith, who was the white prime minister of a 95% African Black country, was trying to manage this change. But he was doing it in response to what he was seeing, that apartheid was coming to an end in Rhodesia. And ultimately, of course, history swept him aside, and Rhodesia became not Zimbabwe Rhodesia, but became Zimbabwe, a country which is now ruled by the majority population. So in Uganda, the dictator also sees that the NRM, National Resistance Movement regime, is coming toward an end, and he's trying to manufacture the transition. And that is why he brings in a person like a Norbert Baum. And you could compare that to what Ian Smith was doing with Bishop Muzorewa. But I'm confident that Ugandans want change to go all the way and not superficial change. And real change is going to happen because the conditions on the ground dictate that. People are not going to tolerate this economic impoverishment. People are not going to tolerate a country like Kenya, Ghana, Botswana having 3 or 4 or 5 times bigger per capita income compared to Uganda's. Let me give you one more example of why I say change is coming and the dictator is trying to manage it. Recently, his son, the deputy dictator, I call him, General Muhoozi, was criticizing the NRM. Muhoozi cannot criticize his father's ruling party without his father's permission. So this is another coordinated, superficial, how should I say, manifestation of what his father is trying to do. And what might he be trying to do? Obviously, his father knows that he will not live forever. His father knew that. He stole the last election so blatantly, he may not be able to do that the next time. So he wants his son to run. But so long as his son runs as an NRM candidate, he knows his son will be rejected at the polls. So he's testing the leaves now. I would not be surprised if his son forms a new party with a new name and with different colors, because the yellow color will be torn down from the walls, right? But his father, of course, will not abolish the NRM. The NRM will be in the background, managing and guiding the son's new party. So when we see these signs of these kind of changes going on in Uganda, it gives me hope that even the dictator himself knows that the NRM regime is coming to an end.
Thank you, Milton. Miriam, I don't know if you agree with Milton. Let me pick your mind on that, and then we proceed to our other issue, which is the U.S.-Africa relations, or the business summit that happened, and what we learned from that.
I really agree with Milton. What we see in Uganda is I'm sure the President Museveni knows that his time is out, but he's looking for a safe landing, sort of. He doesn't know what to expect, and I think they are clutching on straws. So whatever you see, they are talking this recently. We see those handwritten notes from Salim Saleh. Funny things going on. I mean, this has never happened, and I'm also hopeful. I'm glad they are also reading the writing on the wall. But my fear and my biggest call upon Ugandans is how do we transit from this to the next level? Are we going to see Uganda first run down to the ground, and then we start picking up the bricks from the foundation, or we should prevent it before it happens? Because once the regime loses the grip on power, they have destroyed all the buffers, the borders that the Constitution has put in place to protect the regime and enable power transition. For example, they have weakened the parliament, they've weakened all the opposition groups. The civil society is being hunted up and down. Today, I think, or even the end of the 2022, DGF was packing its bags and leaving Uganda. DGF was the funding agency of most of the NGOs that were advocating for good governance and human rights. So with the absence of funders like DGF, we are going to see so many of these activists who are advocating for human rights and good governance all closing shop. And that's a vacuum that is going to stay open. And we don't know what is going to fill that space. So once the regime falls apart, for instance, is the army going to stay intact? You see, the challenge of Museveni is that he has built everything around him. Everything depends on his capacity to hold the pieces together. So once he loses that grip, everything is going to fall apart. But the burden will be on ordinary Ugandans. And what can we do today to prevent that happening in the near future?
Right, absolutely. I agree with you totally. Let's move away from that and look at the recently concluded Africa-US leaders summit. The United States has, we know, political, economic, and of course cultural ties with independent African countries. There's lots that happened at this that summit. There were lots of issues that came to the fore. They're looking at climate change adaptation, post-pandemic economic recovery, transparent governance and democracy, which you have already alluded to, and security priorities. Now, the question here is, at this particular moment, we are seeing, in fact, for me, when that summit happened, what came to my mind was that we are looking at an Africa that is being partitioned between the US, between China, and other, powers. And of course, key of them is Russia. And so we're trying to see a partition that they're trying to meet at a certain point and see, okay, we all have interest in Africa and we ought to, do something here. But question is, what is in it for us as Africans? Are we aware of what these key powers are doing? Are we aware of the effects of their silent partition or scramble for Africa is going through, is going to take us through? What do we pick from this? And moving forward, are we really going to gain much from it? Already we are saying that we have cried to the US to help us understand or deal with the issue of human rights, but instead it is focusing on its interests. Milton, will this yield anything? Or are these powers, are these strong world powers really looking out for their own interests?
Of course, they're looking out for their own interests. The US inherited the imperial role in Africa after formal colonialism ended in the 1960s, because essentially what happened is that the European countries became broke after World War II. They ran out of money. In fact, it was the United States that bailed out the European powers, remember, with the Marshall Plan, billions of dollars to recover the economy after the economies were brought to the ground after World War II with Hitler. So they could not sustain their imperial control over Africa with independently. So the US became the bank roller for some time of Western imperialism, and then the US took direct imperial control over Africa. And as you noted, the US is competing with China. Russia to some extent, but Russia does not have the money. Russia's economy is not as big as it used to be when it was still the Soviet Union, because when it was the Soviet Union, it controlled the economies of other Eastern European countries, the satellite states, when it was still the Soviet Union. So the major competitors really are the United States and China. And the US Africa Leaders Summit was the US response to what China has been doing over the last several years, which is inviting African presidents to China and having a China-Africa Leaders Summit, and then giving all these loans to African countries. Of course, the difference with China and the US is that China has built infrastructure in Africa. China has increased its trade with African countries. It's about 5 or 6 times bigger than the US trade with Africa. But if you look at it in the long run, China's relationship with Africa is no better, really, than the US or Western relationship with African countries, because both of them, or all of them, rather, just want Africa's resources. They get our resources for cheap, very, very cheap, relative to the products that they make with the resources. They could not produce the computers, the automobiles, the planes, the pharmaceutical, all these things that they sell back to Africa at 10, 20, 50 times the price relative to the raw materials that come from Africa. So unless we start getting the true value of our raw material, the relationship will continue to be a relationship of exploitation. So what the US did was invite all these African presidents to say, work with us and don't work with China. That's what it's all about. The solution to Africa's economic liberation is very simple. We have to demand the fair price for all of our raw materials, just like OPEC gets the price that it wants for petroleum. You see? But we sell everything we produce, whether it's coffee, tea, cotton, tobacco, cocoa, which is used for making chocolate. We sell it at the price that they choose to buy it at. Now, what kind of relationship is that? Imagine I come to your home and I say, listen, I want to buy this, that, and that, your belongings at this price, which I'm going to give you. And when I sell you things, I'm going to ask you to pay the price that I want you to pay. Think about that. That is guaranteed permanent poverty. Unless we end that type of relationship, impoverishment will continue to increase in African countries. It can be done, as I've given the example in the past. In 1960, the per capita income of Ghana was more than twice that of China. It was almost $200 per capita for Ghanaians. China was about $89 per capita. Today, Ghana, which is one of the better performing African countries, is 2,300. China's is about 15,000. And China, of course, is now a superpower, does not rely on selling raw materials like it did in the 1960s. Ghana is still in that position. So we need to change that, take control of our resources and say, this is what we want. But in order to do that, we have to be united, if not regionally, if not continentally, at least regionally, because individually we are too weak. These countries are too small and too weak. If you start demanding too much, you know what they do, right? They have many examples. Patrice Lumumba, killed. Thomas Sankara, killed. And all they were doing essentially was demanding that we need to get the fair price for our products. As Sankara said in 1987, when he attended the Organization of African Unity meeting before they had the African Union. And this is very memorable, and anybody can go to YouTube and see it. Just Google Sankara at OAU meeting 1987. He said, we need to have Africa's market for Africa. We need to produce what we consume and consume what we produce. And we need to get rid of the debt. The debt, they trapped us with this debt. We are just paying interest on the debt. We can't use the money to build our economy. But we need to renounce the debt, but collectively. If I do it individually, I will not be alive to attend the next OAU meeting. But they cannot kill 54 African presidents. He said it publicly. That was July 1987. October 1987, he was dead. Think about that. And the African countries are still paying that debt.
Yes, right indeed, Milton. Miriam, with this summit, the voice, the president of the US, Joe Biden, was very keen on saying the fact that they're going to work more closely with the African Union and African partners, especially in addressing lingering challenges, but also he announced billions of dollars in support and investment for Africa. The question here is, Miriam, it's not the first time the US has said this, it's not the first time it has invested in Africa, but where is this headed? Will this come to fruition, or are they just, another summit that goes with, all those promises and nothing?
If things continue like this, I fear it's just headed nowhere. It will be another, patronage kind of relations where the Africans are the subordinates and recipient of some handouts from any Western donor or Chinese or whoever it is, on their own terms, on their own conditions, at the disadvantage of African, at the expense of the Africans as they take away the valuable resources, as Milton had said. Then maybe to go back a little bit, I think USA, apart from countering the China infiltration of African continent, I think that there are so many changing trends on the global economy. The call for green energy calls for changing of resources to use in producing more electric mobiles and all these, the climate compliant technology. And they need resources from Africa. They need the uranium, they need the cobalt. And it's said that 80% of the world resources needed for green energy revolution is going to come from Africa.
Yeah.
So they are changing their focus. They've been focused in the Middle East. It doesn't matter what relations they had, because in the Middle East, the US and the Western world, the relationship they had with Middle East is to destroy all economies in the Middle East, which challenged them. They destroyed Iraq, Iran, everywhere, and in order to access oil. So now the focus is on Africa, because Africa now has the resources they need for green energy revolution. industrialization and all that. But are Africans ready? Are they aware of that shift in power, of that shift in resources? Excuse me. The Chinese competitors, or even Asian tigers, because we even have South Korea and then the other Asian developing countries coming in the market also for the same resources. But they are giving, like Milton said, they are giving Africa, bad terms of economic trade. They are loan sharks, first of all. They give loans at exorbitant interest rates. They are corrupt. They support corrupt regimes. They don't care who is taking the money. They don't care who they are feeding that money. And most of these African dictatorial regimes are being fed by Chinese dollars. And then their exchange doesn't put into consideration of the welfare of the people on ground. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about who's going to benefit from the projects they are putting on ground. They don't care about the abuse of workers on ground, whether they are treated well, whether they are earning a living wage or not. So those are the issues that we really need to iron out. So Africa now has the advantage of having, so many competitors wanting to invest in Africa. So it's time we unite and put our terms across. We should receive this money, this investment on our own terms. We have to stand up from the aggressive China. I mean, China is very good partner of Africa, but it's abusive of that relationship. Like Milton said, they take high valuable products, but they give us cheap products, even at higher prices compared with the prices they take away from our resources. But as if that is not enough, they also bring in loans at high interest rates. We also have to push them to care about the governance issues, and we also have to bring their attention the corruption tendencies that go on when they are doing those transactions. But at the same time, so back to the US-Africa summit. This is like, during colonialism, there were these expeditions where colonialists will uplift African chiefs, take them to London, make them sign up with them, all that. So
exactly.
One of those, we used to have a funny Namkad expedition that happened in Uganda that led to the Uganda Protectorate Agreement. I mean, we are back to that, come to Washington, have a cup of tea, explore the West Wing and whatever of the White House, then you sign agreements without even reading through. I mean, in 21st century.
Yeah, that's the best example.
Very, very unfortunate. And the saddest part is that since our leaders, for instance, Museveni, who is so desperate for funding and is being blacklisted initially because of bad governance, is going to take that opportunity hook and sinker without even reading through, without even checking about how it's going to benefit his country, because he desperately needs money. And the USA doesn't care. As long as you commit yourself, they get the resources they want. They don't care about you at all. You have to demand for that care. I mean, it's upon us to impose on them, to demand for accountability, to demand for conditions. If they really want to invest us, they had to, under what conditions are we going to accept their money? So if we don't push for that, then nothing is going to be done. In the end, we will find ourselves lumped up with so much loans for future generations to pay, which have not benefited any African. And like I said before in this program, last talk show we had, this money, if you lump this money in Africa, chances are that more than 80% of these funds are going to end up again in the Western capitals due to capital flight and corruption. So the Africans are going to end up, African ordinary people are going to end up with an empty bag of loans and interest pay but with no value for that money, with even again, with an imposition of dictators who are really now benefiting from that funding, which is going to empower them. But so we are the losers at the end of it. And this is the time we have to intervene and make sure that that doesn't happen. But it calls for a united Africa, like Milton said. We need a united front, because individually, as states, as people, we can't do much. We can't advocate for much. And they are powerful, like they destroyed Sankara. Indeed, it's very easy for them to cause regime change anyway and put there a puppet and continue with whatever they want to do. So, but united, we are stronger. And we don't need to unite. We don't only need to unite as African states at AU level, but we need to unite as citizens. We need a person in Kampala in touch with another human rights advocate in Kenya. That advocate needs to talk to someone in Egypt. We need to talk to each other. We need to have a united front in order to counter this exploit. I mean, it's an opportunity, but it's a double-edged sword.
Yes, indeed, double-edged sword. And you know, at that meeting, the president of Ghana said that we should not be begging. We shouldn't be seen as begging for anything from the West, especially the US, because we have enough of our own. Yet he had just received some funding from IMF, so it was a bit controversial there. But again, now Milton. The presidents who were speaking, most importantly, I'm quoting Joe Biden because he was the host, and he said crises facing the world today need African leadership, ideas, and innovations, promising to build on the vital investments in Africa. He also said that he's going to back the African Union for a permanent spot at the group of 20 major economies. Question is Africa aware of its potential, economic and otherwise potential? Two, will these proposals, will they yield anything? Are they going to change the general outlook of Africa?
No, they won't. Because you know how capitalism works. So, for example, in the United States, another company is not going to go to help another company to grow and to outcompete it, you see? They would rather undermine, that other company if they can, right? Sometimes they're very large, so they find that they can't undermine each other. So that's when they work together and they say, let's undermine all the other small companies. So if they're very large, they say, we will set a certain price and you, company B, and I, company A, will sell our products at this same price because we can afford to. The other companies will not be able to sustain that and they eventually will collapse. So they work together when there's mutual benefit to destroy other companies, but otherwise they're always trying to undermine each company. So why do I give that example? Because this is a capitalist country. They're not going to go to help develop Africa so that Africa can become a competitor. You see? Right now, they're always complaining about China because China is now a competitor. They compete with the United States in selling manufactured goods to non-industrialized countries, most of them in Africa. They didn't care about China in the 60s. In China, the beef against China was the politics. They're complaining about communism all along. But today, they don't complain about communism. They complain about China undermining their economy by selling cheaper goods to African countries or using cheap labor to produce the things, you see? So the complaint against China has changed because China has now become a competitor. Africa is not a competitor, and the US is not going to help Africa to become a competitor. So that's the basic fact that every African should understand. Many of our leaders understand. They may be corrupt, they may be dictators, but many of them are not fools. They know how the world operates. And they know that in order for them to start benefiting their people, they have to make some concessions. We have too many presidents. We have too many countries. But which of them is going to say, okay, for the sake of our people, I'm going to stop being president? Not a single one of them would be willing to say that. So, for example, in East Africa, why do we have 3 presidents? No, why do we have 5? Why do we have a president in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, Burundi? Why? That's a very small region. Think about it. We need 1 president in East Africa, 1 in Southern Africa, 1 in West Africa, and maybe 1 in the countries in North Africa that see themselves as a part of the continent. And then eventually, maybe 1 president for the United States of Africa. And then you have prime ministers, or in this country, they call them governors, all over the continent. That's really what we need. So instead, when they say, we're going to make you a part of the G20, that goes back exactly to what Miriam just said. They're inviting them to have tea. And they're so excited, oh, I'm going to be standing there with all these white presidents and taking a photograph with them. And to them, that's enough. They forget about our people. And at the end of the day, it is about our people. Our leaders have been very disappointing. As they say, we are sitting on gold. We're sitting on diamond. Miriam gave a very good example. There's great opportunity because the world is shifting toward clean energy. And 60% of cobalt is in the Congo. Think about it. Right now, what African leaders should be thinking about is, how can we protect Congo? And in return, Congo will say, if you can protect me so they don't kill me like they killed Lumumba, like they killed Sankara, then all the benefits from cobalt will be shared amongst all the African countries. And then Congo will be able to ask for 10 times the price it's getting right now, because you need the cobalt to make the batteries for the electric cars. And very soon, all the cars are going to be electric, meaning everybody is going to be going to the Congo. Congo can get 10 or even 20 times the price that it's getting for cobalt right now. But Congo is not strong enough to make that demand by itself. They would get rid of whoever is president in the Congo. But if Congo makes that demand as a part of a collective Africa, then every African country will commit itself to protecting the Congo. And in return, Congo will say, I will share the benefits of this increased price with every African country. These are simple solutions that we can, pursue. And this is only one example of many examples. Instead, instead, they're saying, oh, am I going to be the first one to be invited to G20? It's preposterous.
Absolutely. But yes, you raise a very important issue there, because most of them are just excited about these trips, about the VIP treatments that await them, and just associating with the, name dropping that I can talk to Joe Biden, those things. And it's so disturbing to note that our leaders are that petty, if I could say. Now, Miriam, as you wind up, and we're going to conclude with you quickly, with all the promises from the US Africa Leaders Summit that turned business in a way, with all the promises from it, a seat at the G20, table, having to involve Africa in everything, and ideas and innovations and the like. Do you think it will yield anything? Will this time round, would it be any different? Or are we missing out on the bigger picture of the fact that they are pursuing their own interests? Like Allimadi has, alluded to, they need lots of resources to do a lot of things, which you've also alluded to, that they want, it is strictly their own interests. Now, moving forward, Miriam, honestly, as if we can be honest with ourselves as Africa, are we aware of our own potential?
I think we are aware of our own potential, but our leaders are too compromised to stand out and push for the realization of that potential. Instead, that's how we end up with that the end of the stick kind of deals that will really, it's going to be another cycle of, like you see, the Bretton Woods institutions when they created IMF and World Bank and then gave us the loans and then later the conditionalities. And it's like we are redoing the 20th century all over. And if we don't change anything right now, instead, the African leaders need to step forward and demand their worth. They need to set the agenda. If USA wants to trade with Africa, the Africans need to set the agenda. Africa now is the one which is being demanded. We really have a big potential. We have the resources. We have the youngest population in the world. We still have arable land. We have the fresh water. We have all these things going for us, but the people are a bit disorganized. And then generally, we really have a highest number of educated young people coming up, really. And those are promises. Those are like the resources that led to the development of China. So we have everything going for us, but what we lack is the binding glue, the leadership at the top, the unity of forces there, like Milton elaborated, to really push this vehicle forward, that benefit Africa. For instance, with this US-Africa summit, can you imagine they didn't even have an agenda? Like, this was a meeting for Biden to really show off and all that. They didn't even have an agenda on paper. So who is going to set the agenda? Who is going to dictate the terms? Is it going to be a bottom-down kind of relationship? If it's a bottom-down, it won't benefit us. If it's an even negotiating table where it's a win-win, then yes, it will benefit Africans. And actually, Africans, especially the young people, deserve this opportunity right now. Mm-hmm. What we lack is a big investment to give us a takeoff economically. We need a takeoff to build industries. We need to take off, build higher institutions with research facilities. We need to take off and develop our own research as far as our health and medicine and all of that is concerned. We are still too dependent for our own good. For instance, when COVID came, you saw how COVID affected Africa. It clearly showed that Africans are affected differently from what the Western populations are affected. So I feel like the whole thing of vaccination and whatever was a waste as far as Africa is concerned. Maybe there could have been something else that would have worked for Africa and much cheaper, but because we don't do our own research, we don't even know what works for our population. It's very clear we have a different population. It has melanin. It looks different from most of the Western and Asian populations. But what works for us? What is good for our nutrition? What type of diseases are we prone to? What do we face and how can we control them? We can't continue being dependent on Western education, Western medicine, Western research, Western ABCD. So if we get this money and invest it wisely into building our own institutions, building things which benefit us, I'm sure Africa will benefit a lot. But how we get there is a question that we all need to find a solution for. And I also want to point out that when we are talking of Africa right now, we are also talking of diaspora Africa. Right. It's good that AU recognized the diaspora Africa, but that's a big potential for Africa. All these people in diaspora who originated from Africa need to be called back to invest into the nation, the motherland they really cherish, and they truly love Africa. But we have not harnessed that opportunity. We have not found enough united front where we can rally them to come and invest back in Africa. And that force, as far as skills and even monetary resources are concerned, you might find if we call upon the diaspora Africa to come back to Africa, they could bring in more potential and more investment capacity compared to even what USA is throwing at us. Right. Maybe we don't even need them. but we don't know what is good for us. Right now, we are like so scattered. We are pushed, and the West is still playing that divide and rule kind on us, and we can't unite to see how we can harness our potential and use it for our own development.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Miriam, over that. But now we are winding up, and I want to come to you, Milton, conclusively over the three issues we have tackled as we move into 2023. Where should our focus be, and where should our hopes be? And if not, what should we be working on as you and I, but also as the Uganda Diaspora show, and most importantly, as Uganda Diaspora?
Well, it's hard to say which one because they're all interrelated. So when you talk about economic development, it cannot be seen independently from human rights situation. It cannot be seen independently in change of the political conditions to create a less repressive environment. You can't ignore the continuing kidnapping of people. This is lawlessness, right? When people, you don't know who's going to be kidnapped tomorrow or for what reason. You don't know whether they're going to be seen again. You don't know whether they're going to be tortured. That is a state of terror. You see what I'm saying? And obviously, it's not by accident. It is to keep the people terrified that if I do ABC, might I also get kidnapped? And might I also be tortured? Or might I also get killed? So you have that condition. At the same time, people still need to feed themselves and their family, send their family to schools, get health care. So while you're dealing with that, you're also dealing with the economic issue at the same time. So that's why I really believe in the case of Uganda, we need to end the current situation we have of dictatorship. It can be done. Look at Kenya. Kenya is not a long time ago. We had Daniel Arap Moi for such a long time. Now Kenya has a system with presidential term limits. Kenya has had elections, which of course were marked with a lot of violence, but they learned from that. They learned from 2007, the last election, stolen. The Supreme Court in Kenya reversed it. They called for a new election. Raila decided not to run. So he waited out his chance. They had another election last year. And there was a question whether it was Raila or Ruto who won. But at the end of the day, the court made a judgment. And Raila said he disagreed with it, but he respects it. You see? So Kenya now has mature level of politics. A person who may have won was willing to say, for the sake of our country, I'll respect the decision of the court. So you have stability in Kenya now, which means it will only get better. Ruto will finish his term, and hopefully Ruto will not be influenced by the nonsense from Museveni and try to tinker with the constitution in Kenya to remove term limits. I don't think Kenyans will tolerate that. And the West is now so invested in Kenya's success, I don't think they would allow Ruto to do that as well. Tanzania, you may disagree with the politics of the current president, but they also have term limits. She serves her term, she runs, I believe she'll be eligible for one more term, and if she wins, she wins. If she loses, she loses. But everybody knows that at the end of the day, she will be there only for 2 terms maximum. So there's predictability. Now you can start planning. We don't have that in Uganda. You have a president who can stay there for as long as he's still alive. And that's what he wants to do. And then slip his son, as if this is a monarchy, like the United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth dies, and then the son becomes the next king. We should not tolerate that in Uganda or in any African country.
That's right. Thank you, Milton. Miriam, what say you?
Yeah,
I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Like Milton said, I can't find something to add on that. But maybe to mention, last week the Tanzanian regime allowed the opposition to carry out rallies peacefully. Maybe something that Museveni needs to copy from that. And the way it might look like a dictatorship of sorts, but the way they transitioned power, like so peacefully from the late president to the next one, is something that Uganda cannot really pull off so evenly. But in order to develop, we need political predictability. We need a stability to bring, to give confidence to the investors. We need human rights respect. We need an economy that works for all of us. Lynn, today you could be having a kid you are educating, but I don't know what we tell children today, because we cannot tell them that you are going to study and have a bright future. Not anymore, because they are seeing their big sisters who graduated 10 years ago still don't have a job. So we have this challenge of a young population that doesn't know what lies ahead for them, the future awaiting them. And it's kind of a hopelessness situation, but things could be better. And this century, I mean, with internet, which doesn't, is like a technology which would liberate Africa, because it doesn't need like a lot of.
Miriam, I think you froze.
Sorry about that, Miriam. I think she's frozen.
Wow, so suddenly.
Yeah. I think we have come to the end of the show, really.
Okay, can I do something very quickly?
Yes,
quickly,
please.
just
Yes.
30 seconds. I like that she spoke about education. And I like that even with the desperate conditions, our young people still yearn for education. I know that because I get so many requests from young people just begging to help pay their school fees. Me and my siblings, we sponsor 4 young ladies in college. We started from the first year in university. 2 of them are now graduating next year, and the other 2 will be in their last year, the following year. And, so we take a little bit from our paycheck every month, and we put it aside to sponsor that. So I say this to encourage other Ugandans. Please, whatever you can spare, sponsor young people back home so they can be able to pay their school fees and get an education. Because even though things look desperate today, things will change in the future. So by that time, you want for them to have received good education. So I wanted to add that. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you very much, Milton, indeed. Miriam, we are sorry you got frozen, but we have come to the end of the show, and we'll catch you again next time when time allows, and wish you the very best. Stay safe and Happy New Year.